Hello, I am Jodi Levine from Earthroots Field School. We have the pleasure today of hearing stories from Woniya Thibeault. Woniya is one of the rare Nature Connection mentors who has shared her skills and survival challenges on network TV. She spent 123 days alone in the Arctic for two separate seasons of the History Channel's Alone Solitary Survival Challenge. In her second season on the show, Woniya became the first woman to win the Alone Challenge. Woniya, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump into the conversation about your new book, Never Alone, which is so cool. I'm so stoked to see you on the cover of a book with, bringing to the full world everything that I hold dear around nature connection, that I feel sometimes it's like a closeted life, that in the mainstream world, I have to kind of wear regular clothes and not talk so much about basket weaving. But it's so
Right.
awesome.
Well, so the book and the cover, it was such an interesting dance because I didn't actually picture, a superhero pose of myself on the front cover of the book, but I realized that the point of the book is to get it into as many hands as I possibly can, because that's the only way that you get the subtle messages. Because I know that I have to coyote the nature connection messages to the masses. They're not going to pick up a book that, in fact, we changed the subtitle. The subtitle was how how a solo Arctic survival journey, or something around solo Arctic survival, was a journey towards belonging. And my publicists were like, take that out of the subtitle because that's going to turn people off. And I was like, that's true. I get it. Like, make it the bold headline and the superhero post so they pick it up, and then they're actually going to read it, and then they'll get all of the nature connection and the basket weaving and the asking the trees permission and the leaving an offering so that the world recognizes that you're there in reciprocity, not to dominate it, and all of those pieces. So I had to make compromises in order to give the masses what they felt like they wanted to get so that I could get the message that I need them to get through it.
Mhm. That's so important. It's the coyote in the mainstream world. I love it.
Right.
Okay, so I'm checking out I'm checking out your table of contents for the first time. And the first title is called Proving I Can. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beginning stage of my alone journey was really fascinating, and it felt important to address it because it's the part that the world doesn't see. To the rest of the world, the journey begins the moment you're dropped alone in the wilderness. But for me, being contacted by a television show and agreeing to do it was the scariest part. Putting myself out there, being willing to be totally vulnerable, and to get tons of attention from all kinds of people from all walks of life, that was really big and really scary. And it stirred up a lot of self-worth stuff for me. Like, am I
Mhm.
good enough? Can I do this? And am I willing to have whatever this journey ends up being, which I don't know from the outset what it's going to look like, broadcast to millions of people all over the world? So that's part of the proving I can, is like choosing to do the alone journey as a way to codify my belief in myself. And also, I was very, very ambitious about how I wanted to prepare for the journey. And I decided to make as much of my own gear out of traditional materials as possible, which was also scary and was also a risk. I was saying
Mhm.
that the things I can hand make myself are good enough to trust my life to, and to go out against people who are going to put all they have into buying the top quality, super fancy techno gear possible. So the proving I can was also, do I compromise
Mhm.
and buy good modern gear, or do I trust in the things that I have poured my life into? And then, is it freaking possible for me to make all of that stuff in time to get on that plane? And it barely was. And I didn't compromise. And I almost destroyed myself in the process. So to me, the hardest part of my survival journey was all of the things that I did and managed to survive just to get on that plane up to the Arctic.
Hmm. Well, I know I've known you for a long time, and the way that we know each other is through the ancestral skills community where I've taken your classes on buckskin sewing, and I know that every single detail is held in value, like where the hides come from, making sure that they're tanned with care and thoughtfulness, preparing the materials for class, and teaching with such thoroughness about pattern recognition, and being able to use the part of the material that was working on the animal's body in the same way that you'll want it to work on your body, so that there'll be give or tightness. And I just know with so much care, I can imagine that pressure that you had within yourself to prepare your own gear and get everything ready with care and connection and respect and trust, all of that woven in. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that it ended up to work in your favor. And even I can imagine even how just knowing that you did all that probably brought your state of mind into such a place of belief and trust that allowed you to have that lifted spirit when things were hard. And I just wanted to tell you that I really admire that about you, and it's given me a lot of inspiration. I'm sitting right now next to a stack of willow branches. I'm going to kind of bend them over that I'm drying right now. Nice. We just went out harvesting willow, and I think about you sometimes when I'm doing these things and imagining what it would be like to live in those places. And I was wondering if you felt like sharing any stories about your time in the Arctic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are definitely stories related to willow on my time in the Arctic. And, it's funny, and I talk about this in the book, how the ways that I live my life and what's a treat versus what's a chore to me, I think are probably really different than for the average person. And one of the things that really exemplified that on my alone journey was that, and I think I had some schmutz on my camera. I feel like I'm actually going to polish my screen with this pack basket strap. I just made this basket for my mom for Mother's Day. So there, nothing better for cleaning a screen than hometown leather.
Show me your basket that you made for your mom. We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And so I presented her with the basket on Mother's Day, but the straps weren't done until last night. So I just attached the straps, and this is bark tanned deer. It might even be a small elk, but I think that it's a deer skin, a really big muley, big buck. So when I was out on alone, I would set all of these goals for myself. And it was like, when I accomplish this certain thing, then I get this reward. And one of the rewards that I held for myself, because it wasn't a true survival need, it would be very important and a huge convenience. But when I got game and had the capacity to think about something besides just the basics, shelter, food, warmth, then I got to go and harvest willow for myself. So I tell the story of how after getting, I think it's when I get my first grouse, then I get to go out and harvest a bunch of willow, and what it meant to be able to bring this craft that's such a beautiful part of my life and such a part of how I connect with the landscape to this wild landscape was so beautiful. And it was an opportunity to talk in the book about this concept of wild tending and the idea that humans have a place in the wild, and we're not just a destructive force. We also actually improve the quality of the land through some of the ways we interact with it. And willow is such a potent metaphor for that, in that willow grows better when we engage with it. And there's so many places that willow goes untended in our modern world. So to go to this place that I didn't know and get to step into this beautiful tending relationship that I have back in my homeland was so fulfilling. And also the willow that I was harvesting, the only person who had tended that was the local resident moose, because it was coppiced because the moose had been nipping it off. If you just go into a wild landscape where nothing's been clipping the willow, it's not very harvestable or usable. But there happened to be one stretch of shore that I could tell moose had nipped off the willow in the previous growing season, and that made this amazing basketry resource available to me.
What a cool story.
I don't know if you've gone through the book itself, but each title page has art that is tracks of a creature that is important in that part of the book.
Right now I'm looking at the map,
the
truffula tree. Attempted
Yeah. And the
fishing
same
spots.
artist
Oh,
did the
that's so
map and
cool.
those tracks. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
I really wanted the readers to be able to picture themselves there. When I read books and they give place descriptions, it doesn't really land anywhere
Hmm.
because I don't know where things are in relation to another. And I realized that I was describing the place with such detail and that that wasn't going to really give people an idea of what it was like unless they could see it and connect and see the different places that I refer to. So I'm
Hmm.
really thrilled with how the maps turned out and to be able to give that to the readers.
Yeah, that's so important. I love how you did that.
It's interesting because the original title I wanted to use for the book was Living on Beauty because that was my experience.
Oh
I
yeah,
was not
part
eating
two.
very much out there, but I felt so strong and so buoyed up, and I had this epiphany eventually that that's what was happening was I had shifted my metabolism to live on beauty instead of on calories. And what happened was all of the titles that I had wanted and all the different themes of the book became parts of the book
Hmm.
rather than the titles themselves.
That's beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more about living on beauty? Because I can imagine the essence of it, and I can think back to the things that you talked about in the show, like reading the sun as one of your daily routines. Is that what you're talking about when you say living on beauty?
Yeah, it's all part of it. I would say that the living on beauty was a specific epiphany moment when I went through an arc of hunger where early on I wasn't eating anything and the hunger's pretty uncomfortable at first and then you get used to it. And then it's a while before any physical symptoms, or I should say my experience was that it was a while before I started to have physical symptoms of weakness or decline from not eating. And I had that for a little while. And then I passed through that. Even though I wasn't getting any more to eat, I got to the point of feeling strong
Hmm.
and inspired and healthy and motivated. And I was like, what? How is this happening? Because I was failing from hunger 5 days ago, and I have had less to eat since then and less body reserves. And yet I feel so strong and so engaged. And I realized that it was just had to do with total awe about the incredible wildness of the
Hmm.
place I was in and the beauty of the place. I was so in love with it. And I just realized, oh, that's what it is. I'm being fed by the beauty,
Hmm.
by the love of place, by the wildness, and by the fulfillment of a long cherished dream. I mean, the dream of my heart ever since I can remember was to go into an amazing wild place and live with just the resources that I could gather myself and experience what it is to live as our ancestors lived, as wild animals lived.
Hmm.
So those things replaced calories for
Hmm.
me and kept my body strong and vital, while a lot of folks who would focus on their suffering rather than what they were getting from the experience might have really tanked further and quicker than I did through that capacity to just be nourished by something different.
Hmm. It's remarkable, really, and what a gift that you were able to have that experience with your body. Not that I
Yeah.
would want it for everyone, but I find that knowing what our bodies can do is a really empowering experience. And and like rock climbing, I mean, that's not even a comparable thing, but just rock climbing or giving birth or different things that you put your body through, running a marathon, swimming a long distance swim in the ocean, all these things, they give you confidence that you can handle whatever's to come. And it sounds like your
Yeah.
experience was an extreme version of that, that people nowadays just don't have the opportunity to do, and most wouldn't want to be honest. So it's
Right.
so
Yeah.
wonderful to be able to hear that story, to know, we can do it.
Yeah.
We
And
can
that's
do hard things.
exactly Yeah, and that's exactly why I needed to write the book, was recognizing, and that's actually a direct quote from the book, is I know most people will never have an experience like I did in the Arctic, and I know given the opportunity, most would run away from rather than towards it, and that's why I have to write this book so that you have some way to access that dramatic experience. And I wrote the book in first person present tense so that the reader gets to
Mm-hmm.
live it as they are me, as they're experiencing it moment by moment. That felt really important to have it be an immersive experience so they actually really get on a visceral level what it was to go through all of those things.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited to have it out in the world. Is this a good time for me to share with you the kinship calendar?
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, there's a lot to take in, so I'm going to start with the name. The inspiration for giving it the title Kinship Calendar comes from the indigenous perspective that everything from the natural world is related, like family or kin. So by tracking our interactions with animals, plants, flowing water, movements of the sun and moon, and everything that pulses with life, we're strengthening the relationships between us and those things. When we have stronger relationships with the natural world, we feel authentic connections with those things and are more likely to make choices in our daily life to care for and protect these valuable relationships, or as some say, resources. We know that meaningful learning happens when we engage as many senses as possible with the lesson and have access to ongoing learning opportunities. So Karen, who is Earthroots Director of Curriculum Instruction, wanted to find a way to visually represent why we teach acorn processing in the fall, or why we need to be more aware of rattlesnakes in certain seasons but not others. Other things like why we need to schedule our creek explorations after the rainy season, what are the best times of year to harvest basketry materials, and what time of year we should tune into birds building their nests or tadpoles in the creek. You get the idea. We give these posters as a gift to our weekly program participants so that they can look at it throughout the year and have a reminder at home of those relationships that we build and nurture during Earthroots classes. There's so much information packed into it, and it's laid out in a way that once you orient yourself to it, it's easy to use. If you look at it, each moon time in the calendar, which is new moon to new moon, is named after something observed locally during that time. The seasonal notes for each moon time can be used to orient yourself to the time of year. And we intentionally left out Gregorian calendar dates to bring us back to the old ways of tracking patterns through the year by what we observe, which is the way all of our ancestors did it long ago. So this calendar highlights examples of seasonal rhythms in coastal Southern California that are the foundation for building stronger relationships for the Earthroots community. The kinship calendar has become this gift that we can now share with the world, and that we hope will inspire others to create something similar where they live, using what they observe as the foundation for creating the seasonal notes. So this calendar is available on Earthroots website to purchase as a printed poster, to hang on your wall at home, as a free digital download, and also to download a template with instructions, step-by-step instructions, so that you can make your own kinship calendar highlighting the meaningful relationships in your area.
Well, Jodi, that kinship calendar is amazing. I love it. It's both I love the way it's put together and all the things that it means, but it's also so beautiful. So I love both the visuals of the rainbow colors and how exactly it matches what's happening that time of year, and then all of the smaller drawings. And I just feel like there's no way for someone not to be more connected to what's going on in the world around them if they have that on their wall and they're looking at it regularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we were making that, I think about my different friends who might enjoy it, and you came to mind as someone who probably walks around the world with that imprinted in your mind in a lot of ways, not necessarily the calendar
For
layout, but just
sure.
having the awareness of what's going on around you. And I wanted to ask if you have any stories from your time in the Arctic, or stories at home or on trips to different places where knowing what was happening around you gave you an upper hand in solving a problem or surviving or thriving. Just the information of cyclical awareness of what the patterns are in nature and how they're going to be predictable every year. How does that give you a tool or an upper hand to do something that's important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, there are so many obvious ones, right? Where if you're not paying attention to what's happening with the plants, then you're not going to be able to go and harvest them when you need. I can tell a wonderful story that was from just this weekend with my mom, and my mom really wanted me to make her some maple flower fritters for Mother's Day. And I thought, oh, I don't know, it's a little late in the season. I think it's past the time for maple flowers, but because I knew the patterns of how spring unrolls throughout this varied landscape that we live in, and I knew that the maple leaves were also big down at the lower elevations, that there were not going to be any flowers. So we went up the mountain, And even so, the flowers were past, the leaves were gone. But there were a couple places where there were trees that had fallen and had taken out a maple tree, like a big incense cedar that fell and toppled a maple tree. And because that tree was under stress and knew it probably wasn't going to make it to more seasons, it was putting out a burst of flowers. And so we got our maple flower fritters way past the season for maple flowers from knowing two things: that the season is further behind, further up the mountain, and that certain environmental stresses will make plants behave really differently than they otherwise would. So that's one example of understanding the patterns in the world around us and the botanical knowledge of when a plant thinks it's going to die, it's going to do everything it can to reproduce much more than normal. So that's a direct application of knowledge of the natural world. But in general, paying attention, like, for example, I went to a local park near our place in Reno last week and was scouting around to see the state of the botany in that area, because I didn't want to miss the narrow window to harvest the nettles in that area. I harvested them months ago on the coast in California, but up in the high desert, the season is really different. So going and scouting regularly and tracking the different things. Okay, this is coming up now. Nettles won't be far behind, and I only have a window of a week or two to harvest those nettles at their peak. So I'd better be checking in and seeing what the patterns are and what is tied to other things flowering, because maybe the ones that you're after, you're not going to see the second they get ready. But if you know how to predict it based on what else is getting ready before them, then you're golden.
And I wanted to ask you specifically, what are you going to do with your nettles?
Oh, I'm going to eat the heck out of them. So I harvest nettles, and then I like to do some nettle pesto rather, and freeze some nettles, but mostly I dry them. And then every morning, in fact, do I have my jar? No, I think the jar's inside. But most mornings I start the day with bone broth, and I usually put powdered dried nettles in my bone broth. So I'm drinking a really strong nettle tea, essentially, except that I'm eating the greens too, not just drinking the tea. But so I eat nettles almost every day that I can, because they're one of the most nutritious foods on the planet. And luckily they grow in abundance most places where you find them.
You and I are probably two unique people that do eat nettles almost every day, because I just had mine today too. I had them in my lunch.
Wonderful. Nice. Yay.
I also use dried nettles, and I put a handful in with my whatever the meat is I'm eating, or rice or veggies, just to add that extra burst of nutrition. I love that.
Good stuff. Yeah.
I love that. Can I ask you a personal question about your trip and your coming home? And you can choose to answer it or not.
Yeah, of course.
I wanted to ask
I share pretty vulnerably in the book. So, I talk about my moon time and my constipation and how I worked that through, and pretty much no holds barred.
Great. Thank you. Because we're all learning from you. So I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask about your recovery after you got, basically picked up from a helicopter from your very remote home that you'd created in the Arctic, and you'd lost a bunch of weight and hadn't been eating as much as your regular self, and you were having a lot of energy output to maintain your life. And you got picked up, and then what was your recovery like? How long did it take you to rebuild the strength to do the things that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is another one of those things that folks watching the Alone show don't see. And I think that there's a reason, because I think the show is maybe not excited for people to recognize how deeply affected people's bodies, psyches are after such an extreme wilderness immersion. I would say probably between 1.5 to 2 years for full recovery. But I talk about this extensively in the book. All of part 5 is about my recovery. And that's part of what the coming home to me refers to, is having left a big part of my heart behind and having to deal with not just the physical recovery, but the real sense of grief and loss from leaving this way of life that was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. So the recovery process is intense, and it looks really different for different people. Both times it looked like a refeeding program for me to get the body back
in a state where it could actually process nutrients. That was much more intense the first time than the second time. I was deeply, deeply starving pretty much my entire time on Alone season 6. I would say there were maybe 2 or 3 days out of 73 that I got somewhere near the amount of calories that I needed. Not all the calories I needed, but a little closer to it. But most days I was deeply starving, and more days than not, I had nothing but a little bit of berries. And the second time I was eating a lot more, but it still wasn't enough, and it was no fat and no carbohydrates. So that's an issue too. But the recovery is the real intense part is the very beginning where you're getting used to eating again. But then there's all kinds of longer term things, and different people have different experiences of it. But both times I got a pretty major illness that the first time sent me to the ER. And the second time definitely required major medical intervention. That the first time it was ER doctors, right? So they didn't know me and my story, and I didn't tell them what I'd been through. But the second time it was a personal doctor who had been a military doctor, and he told me that he was used to seeing things like I had in soldiers after really intense deployments. And he said, 100%, this is because of what you put your body through. And that was actually mono with a bacterial lung infection on top of it. That just, I don't know, if I hadn't had modern medicine, what would have happened. And something similar the first time, but I didn't have the exact diagnosis. So to me, it looked like slow rebuilding, my metabolism being totally thrown off, a long time to recover weight, and then putting on a ton of weight, and my body fiercely guarding every calorie. And so some of that looked like eating a lot because I was hungry, and some of it looked like compulsive eating and a lot of anxiety around food and going without. So I think that the coming back to a healthier metabolism was the long arc recovery, but then a lot of weird physical symptoms in the interim, like injuries that popped up that didn't seem related to what I was actually doing in the moment, but seemed related to something I had gone through while I was out in the wilderness. And a lot of psychological things, just coming back to dealing with all of the trappings of modern society. So like schedules, email, numbers, anything abstract, not right in front of me, were really hard. And I had big resistance to wanting to engage in that way ever again, after getting to experience something so different and loving the space from that, and having my reality just be what I could see and touch. So a lot of different elements of recovery, and it was incredibly hard. The first time, I would say, was more challenging because I was much more attached to the place and had a lot of grief from being torn away from it. I loved the place the second time too, but it was so much harder that I definitely was thinking about and missing home a lot on the second experience. So coming back to it, there was more joy the second time than the first time.
The first time you weren't ready to leave.
No,
the second time
I really
you
didn't want
weren't.
to leave. Yeah, there was still regret, there was part of me that didn't want to leave, but I was more aware of what I was returning to the second time, and more aware of what I was leaving the first time.
Wow. I wanted to go back to something that you said about the recovery and about the resistance to jumping into the abstract world of modern day life. And just something that you said made me realize that that's probably a survival skill of it, or a survival instinct of itself, to resist these things. And I wonder, because I also feel that way if I'm on a really beautiful backpacking trip or an immersion experience in nature, where I feel more fully connected, like my whole system is plugged into the natural rhythms of the place and the beauty of it. Wouldn't be in the same degree as you experienced in the Arctic, but I have a sense or a taste of what that is like. And it seems like that's the program within us that our ancestors had. And that's the way our, human family has survived for for all these years before the invention of modern day living. And so I'm really curious about
everything in us is wired to live the way that we do in the wilderness, and nothing about us is wired to live in the modern world. If we're looking at an actual evolutionary and physiology standpoint, it's only been 100 years that we had access to the real modern, if we're talking electricity and climate controlled homes and obviously internet and phones more recent, that's not enough time for our physiology to adapt to those things.
Let me ask you a question. At Earthroots, our mission is to connect people with nature. And our mission statement is cultivating a sense of care and connection between people and the natural world. And if you had an opportunity to give a couple words of advice to people who wanted to cultivate a sense of care and connection with the natural world, what would you say to them?
Great question. Connecting people to the natural world and recognizing the nature within as well as without is also my life's work and my mission. And a lot of what I encourage people are, well, I should say there are several different approaches. One is that I remind people that while we feel divorced from the natural world a lot in modern society, it's actually literally impossible for you not to be connected to the living world around you. Every inhale, you are breathing in molecules that a plant put out. And with every exhale, you are giving something back to the green world, something that it needs. So try holding your breath for very long and see if you can live without nature connection, right? It's part of you. There's nothing you can do about that. And that's a wonderful, beautiful thing. The other things that I really encourage are to start making a daily practice of paying attention to the plants and the birds in your area, because while you might not have the fortune to have black bears roaming in your woods or bobcats popping up on the rocks around your home, everybody has plants and birds because those things get everywhere. Birds have wings. Peregrine falcons nest on skyscrapers in cities, and try to have a vacant lot sit empty without dandelions coming through the cracks in the sidewalk eventually, right? Plants and birds have an amazing ability to get everywhere. So they're a way that everyone, no matter where they are, can connect to the world around them. And by learning a few patterns of the plant and bird world, then you automatically get into that more childlike mindset and that curiosity and that engagement, and you start noticing, and that spreads out to everything in your life, building those powers of awareness and observation, curiosity, and asking questions. That is going to inform everything else that you do in beautiful ways. So those would be the three things that I really like to emphasize in my work.
Such great advice and so well said. Thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure. Hooray.
I'm wondering, as part of this interview, if there's anything special that you want to share that we haven't talked about yet. You can talk about the book launch or about any classes that you have coming up.
There are so many different ways for folks to plug into the work that I do. I am someone who travels around and does a lot of teaching, and I also have online courses. This year, my focus has been very much on my book, and so I have less offerings, but I am doing a book tour where I'm traveling around and going to bookstores up and down the West Coast, doing signings, answering questions, and then trying to offer some classes in conjunction with that help people that helps give somewhere to go with the inspiration to connect more deeply that I'm hoping people would be getting through my book. So reading my book definitely is a great way to plug in more to what I do. But then another thing that's a wonderful thing that helps support me and have me more able to give more to the world, and also you get all kinds of great benefits, is joining my Patreon team. Because sometimes I don't have time to put out YouTube videos or do online courses or social media, but I always make time for my Patreon members. We have regular interactive Zoom calls with themes around nature connection and ancestral skills, and a lot of me sharing what I'm up to. So that's a really wonderful way for folks to be plugged in, but also checking out my website, buckskinrevolution.com, which is my business focused on sharing ancestral skills. And then my readings and book things and consultation and speaking is all on my other website, WoniyaThibeault.com. So between those two things and Patreon membership and following me on social media, it gives you access to a ton of different offerings that I put out into the world, all focused on you connecting more deeply to your own wilder nature, to the wild places and the nature around you, and ideally coming together in community to be more connected to our human peers, because we didn't evolve to do this stuff in isolation. It really takes community and that kind of inspiration and sharing and witnessing to keep us really engaged and keep us accountable to actually putting into practice the things that we most want for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I hear you on that. Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're out in the world and doing that. And I'm hoping that we can draw you into Orange County, California for part of your book tour, and maybe even a program or two at Big Oak Canyon, teaching some of the skills that you talk about in your book and on your online courses. I won't hold you to it, but I would love that. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or share from your book?
In terms of my book, Never Alone, I would say that I think there's something in it for everyone. And I write it in a way that is about helping people see themselves in me. So it's in a conversational tone, and there's humor, and there's suspense, and there's beauty and joy. And the idea being that it feels really important to me because I am known for, this incredible extreme survival experience and for being, a winner of one of those. And it's easy for people to put people like that on a pedestal and be like, wow, they're amazing, and I could never do that. And my message is exactly the opposite. It is, look, I was a awkward, lonely only child, and I didn't really believe in myself. And I went on to do things that little me would never have dreamed were possible. And if I could do it, so can you. So being a representative of the common person, being a representative, someone who had to fight for self-worth and believe in their own capacity. And therefore, I really hope that my story can be an inspiration and a beacon for others who are struggling in those same ways.
I love that. I'm so happy that you said that. And I wanted to share with you that I really value you as a spokesperson. You're positioning yourself in a way that other people can identify with that message. And something that you said when you were being filmed on the last Alone episode, you were talking about how you really see how girls can identify you and perhaps recognize that you were the first woman to win this show, and showing how it's possible for girls to do something that's hard and has only been held in a position of men. And I really appreciate that too. And, I also look as a woman of short stature, that you're not a big burly woman, you're petite, and you have a body structure that some people might say like, oh, she's not fierce enough to handle something like that, or I don't know if she can really make it. But you have such a presence and a commitment to the values of nature connection and of trusting the materials that supported our ancestors to survive for thousands and thousands of years. And the way that you won the show was to just stay committed to the truth of nature connection and of trusting yourself. And that really shows that you don't need the expensive gear or the fancy hunting equipment, but that you can show up to the stage with who you are and what you are and pull it off by some badass skills and a life of practice. And I'm just so proud of you. And as your friend, just feeling really grateful that I get to know you, and as one of my teachers, that I've been learning from you for a long time. So I'm just so stoked for you, and really grateful that we've had this chance to talk about your experiences and a little bit about what's to come.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thrilled too. And I see all that in you too, and love what I know of your work and the ways that you throw yourself into that, and you do something bravely that I could never do, which to do it in the belly of the beast, and in a hard environment, and through the school system and all of the bureaucracy that you are willing to confront to do that. That would be an extreme survival adventure for me. So I love that we're able to support each other's work with like the same goals in mind, and yet from these really different angles. So they dovetail beautifully.
Yeah, thanks for recognizing that. I do feel like sometimes I'm in the belly of the beast, but it's also where I come from. I was born and raised here in Orange County, so this is my normal, and I do often long for the remote beauty of wilderness, and I'm so grateful that we've carved out this beautiful wilderness spot in Silverado Canyon, which is part of Orange County, to really nourish my connection with nature and create opportunities for a lot of other people to really feel what it's like to be next to running water that flows from the earth, and see the 100-plus-year-old oak trees, and be amongst the sages and the fragrances of wilderness. So I really feel like for some reason it's all coming together, and it's working to support Earthroots down here.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled.
Can't wait to show you sometime.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah, we should definitely be in touch about the Southern California leg of my tour. It'd be really, really sweet to connect up with that. And I can't wait to see the calendar up close and personal. And I would love to share it and support it in whatever ways I can. I think it's an awesome project and super useful.
Well, Woniya, it has been just an incredible opportunity to talk with you, and thank you for sharing all your stories. And I'm really excited to read Never Alone, your new book that comes out on June 13th. And I'm really excited for the world to see it and to get to know more about you.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to share it. And I'm hoping that it's gonna sweep the globe and really get a lot of people inspired to get out, whatever it looks like, even just for a brief hike or an overnight, to get out and see the natural world through new eyes and from a place of wanting to really engage deeply.
Mm-hmm. I know it will. It's already inspired so many people, and your work on Alone, your work Surviving and Thriving, has really inspired a lot of people. So thank you again for all that you do. And I look forward to seeing where this takes us next.
Wonderful. Me too. Thanks so much, Jodi. Much love to you. And thanks for having me.
You're welcome.